year, before Trump's even in office, he's already enacting policies that are going to put the American people and their grocery prices, their gas prices, and their front door first. And that's what it's about time we do, is put the interests of our voters ahead of those of the rest of the world.
Yes, sir. Amen to all that. Thank you, gentlemen. Senators Tommy Tuberville and Tim Shee. I mean, most grateful to have you. We appreciate it very much. One big, beautiful coalition for one big, beautiful reconciliation bill. Now, the question is, will the Senate GOP get on board? So, we'll ask one big Senate Finance Committee chair, Mike Crapo. Next up.
About earlier on your show, and that is to make the tax changes permanent. Instead of a $4.3 trillion tax hike, most of which hits people in lower income and middle income categories, we need to have a permanent tax code so that we can have reliability. The Tax Foundation indicates that if we are to extend this current TCJA and do it permanently, we'd see about a 1.1% growth in the economy, minimum. And that's about $3 trillion of revenue right there over the next decade.
So let's go back to that revenue point, because that's so important. And I want to get to your current policy baseline, which is it's one of the reasons we love having you on, because people do not appreciate your point of view. First of all, the CBO and the Joint Tax Committee are always wrong. The 2017 tax cuts, they not only paid for themselves, they unfortunately paid for a lot of other things, bad spending things. Right. That's one point. Second point is your point about current policy baseline. If this is a permanent tax cut and you're just extending it, why does it have to be scored at $3 or $4 or $5 trillion the way the CBO is going to do it? Why?
It doesn't have to be, and I think almost every American who has any common sense understands that if you're not changing the tax code, you're simply extending current policy, you are not increasing the deficit. The bottom line here is that it's a $3 trillion tax increase, not a $4.3 trillion deficit increase. And you've indicated it. We grow the economy, we save people from massive tax cuts, tax increases that hurt them terribly, and we give permanency to the tax code. We've got to get some kind of sensibility into the way that we score. And what CBO and joint tax score is a congressionally created scoring system, which, as you have indicated, is always inaccurate.
Yeah, but the other thing is, this business about the current services baseline. So these spending programs go on forever, but they're not scored as deficit increasers. But if tax cuts are coming in and they go on forever, they're scored as deficit raisers. It's like the whole system is geared for government to take your money rather than for you to keep more of what you earn.
That's exactly right, and let's not be fooled by this. If we had a $4.3 trillion tax increase, Congress would use it to spend on new spending. It's a tax and spend philosophy, and you indicated that about $2.5 trillion of the spending is under current policy baseline. That's intended to protect the spending, so it goes on perpetually, but the taxes don't get the same kind of treatment. I think that Americans can see through this.
One last one, Senator. If Mr. Trump goes for a universal tariff of 10%, which is, Europeans have had a 20% VAT, it says 10% tariff, ring around the collar tariff. You know what? You'd make, in static terms, I don't know how long this would last, but $5 trillion worth of imports at 10% tariffs would come to $500 billion worth of revenues. Now, those are inexact estimates, I know, but there is a good deal of truth. If Mr. Trump puts on that kind of tariff, all right, and uses that negotiating or whatever, you're going to raise a lot of money to help finance a lot of different things. Help finance defense, for example. Help finance the wall. Help finance more ICE agents for deportation. What do you think of that?
I've talked with President Trump about this, and I understand that approach, and there will be a significant amount of revenue potentially from tariffs. We've got to be sure it's done right and done in a way that does not injure our economy or create inflation. But there is a strong case that President Trump is making that he can do this well. He did it well the first term. He had serious successes in his tariffs on China and on France and on Canada that had positive results in our trade relations with them that were beneficial overall. We need to see that kind of result of tariff policy. And you're right, done well, it can help our economy and grow our economy just as these tax cuts will.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Senator Mike Crapo, thank you. I think you're the smartest guy in the Senate. That's all.
Thank you.
We appreciate your coming back. One big, beautiful bill. Steve Moore, David Malpass. I'm Kudlow. Be right back. With all respect for Ted Cruz, or not, joining us, David Malpass, former president of the World Bank. Steve Moore, host of More Money on WABC Radio, Unleash Prosperity. I don't know if you heard it or not, Steve Moore. Ted Cruz, the great Ted Cruz, the conservative Ted Cruz, the brilliant Ted Cruz, argued with me to wants 2 bills or 3 bills. We can't get it done in 1 bill. It's not important done, and we'll get to the taxes when we can get to them. And I don't agree. With all respect for Ted Cruz, a genuine conservative. I don't understand it, Steve Moore.
Well, I want to tell your viewers a quick story about what happened in 2017. You hinted at this on this earlier in the show, but do you remember December 22, 2017, Larry, when you and I got an emergency call from Mitch McConnell saying we don't have enough votes for our tax bill, and we had to go pounding on the doors of 5 or 6 Republican senators trying to get persuade them, that this was an important thing to do. And so my point is, we came within an eyelash of not getting that historic tax bill done. I don't want to live through that again. I want to get this done. I think, did Jason say that he thought we could do it by Memorial Day?
Yes.
I'll take it.
Yes.
I think that's a great, I want a Memorial Day, we're going to have this tax bill signed, because one other quick thing.
The whole thing, the big bill, the big bill, the big
whole
bill,
thing.
yeah.
And here's the thing. Here's why it is so important to do it quickly, in addition to all the reasons you already mentioned. The taxes will go up by several $1 trillion at the stroke of midnight if we don't do this. So time is of the essence.
By the way, one of the key aspects of this bill for large and small business is the immediate 100% expensing write-off for machinery and equipment, okay? That's already down to 20%, David Malpass, okay? Because it's been coming down from 100 to 80 to 6, or it's either 40 or 20. That's going to run out. I think the fact that there's no advancement going on in capital spending in manufacturing is in some part uncertainty about extending the bill, but also the fact that those write-offs may not exist anymore, David Malpass.
That's right, Larry. And so we know that the tax bill is critical for investment and critical for growth, critical for small businesses. So I think the economics are really clear. Steve gave a story from 2017. I'll give you one from 1981. Remember, Reagan came in and phased in the tax cut.
Yeah, I said that.
And it got a recession.
Yes.
It was a pretty intense recession. And so we know what happens when you do it wrong. I think what will happen here is the House will have one bill. That was what happened in 1985 with the big Tax Reform Act of 86. It started in the House. There was Gucci Gulch where every lobbyist got provisions. I hope they'll manage to avoid that. And then it went over to the Senate and it got torn apart. So the risk here is to find a way to work with the senators to get this done fast. The urgency is very clear.
But Rostenkowski won that final at the end of the day. Rosti won that. I've always given him credit for that. Yes.
No, remember it was Bob Packwood on the Senate side.
Packwood, yes. But he
rewrote the bill.
He was a good deal maker. Anyway, let's not argue about that. Steve Moore, I want to raise another issue here.
So it was in.
Okay, David, let me, we don't have too much time. Steve Moore, I want to go to the second issue, and that is Nippon Steel and U.S. Steel. Joe Biden has ruled against it. The Committee on Foreign Investment, CFIUS, and the Treasury Department basically punted. They all became very political. Biden is using, he's saying we can't have a deal because of national security. I don't understand that. Now, Mr. Trump also opposes it, but particularly on the Biden national, I just don't understand in general why it seems to me Nippon Steel is going to save U.S. Steel. It's going to save it. U.S. Steel is going to go down. They're going to close factories and lay workers off big time if they don't get the investment from Nippon Steel. What do you think, Steve Moore?
Well, I can explain why Joe Biden came out against this. You see, he has memory problems, and he thinks we're living in 1935, not 2025. Japan is no longer an enemy of the United States. They're one of our greatest allies. And by the way, they're a check against China. This is the point, and I love talking about this on your show because I know Donald Trump watches your show. Mr. President, we want Japan to have take control of this deal. And by the way, they're not taking control of it. They're just going to remanage it. But the jobs are going to stay in Pennsylvania, Larry. But if we don't do this deal, the biggest winner will be China, that's trying to take over the whole steel industry all over the world. This is good for jobs. It's good for workers. It is good for the investors, and it is good for America. And Donald J. Trump, who you've been alongside him much more than I have, but he's the greatest negotiator I've ever seen. I want Donald Trump to come in, negotiate a good deal, and let's get this thing done.
David Malpass, what do you think about the Nippon U.S. Steel story?
That President Biden has made wrong decisions at each time they're presented. Think of
Exactly.
Afghanistan,
Right.
Ukraine, Israel. Just in the last week, wrong decisions on offshore drilling, on Social Security Trust Fund draining that he's doing right at the end of his term, one after the other. And so the national security grounds, I worked on CFIUS heavily, both in 1986 when it was being written, the Exxon Florio, and then again in 2017 when it was updated. National security is at the core, but it doesn't mean Japan is the violator. Steve's right. China is the one to watch, and that's how we should be using CFIUS, not this way.
President Trump is against the deal, but I see the deal as America first. I mean, I see Nippon's strengthening U.S. Steel. Look, Honda came in. Look what they've done. Honda's like the biggest American manufacturer now. Or you could say the same thing about Toyota, in terms of domestic content. Why not let them come in? Why not? There's like attracting foreign investment to make America stronger and hire more as part of the blue collar boom. I mean, I'm not sure I understand it, but I appreciate... David Malpass, why should Joe Biden's change now? He's done everything wrong up to now. So it's way too late.
That's right.
Let's get him,
Growth is important, and Biden's been bad on that too.
Yes, growth is important. David Malpass and Steve Moore, thank you very much. Now we're going to change gears, even though we love growth. We have Liz Peek, syndicated columnist, Fox News contributor, and we welcome back Emily Compagno, co-host of Outnumbered on Fox News and author of Under His Wings. Thank you, ladies. Appreciate it very much. Emily, can I raise this guy, Judge Juan Merchant, who wants to sentence the sitting president-elect, who was just certified today, as you well know. He still has a gag order on him. He's going to sentence him so he can call him a felon. He's not going to give him any prison time. I think this just violates every legal thing and keeps going with the weaponization and all the lawfare. But I don't know. What do you think of this? It's kind of an insane story.
Yeah, look, you're not wrong, first of all. This is unconstitutional on so many levels. And really any semblance of judicial objectivity that we could have afforded Judge Juan Merchant flew out the window for two reasons. Number one, the fact that he utterly failed to give the president-elect time to pursue his appeal of the immunity point, because that would have preserved his status not as a convicted felon. And we know that the vast majority of Americans thought that this particular trial was lawfare and politically motivated, and therefore, as he writes in his opinions, the fact that it's upholding the law and preserving people's faith in the criminal justice system. No, it couldn't be anything further from that. So this shows this is simply political. And the second reason is that for him failing to require unanimity of the jurors and specificity, this is why in part it's unconstitutional, of the underlying charge, it could have been one of anything that they merely hinted at, right? The election integrity,
Exactly.
fraud, falsification of business records. But the fact that he continues to state in his opinions it is only about election integrity again reveals the fact that he is so partisan and this is so political, and that it is just for the soundbite of him saying this is a convicted felon that has sworn into office.
And I think he did it now because he wants to beat the appeal. I mean, I think Merchant deliberately did that. The gag order is, I don't mean to point at you, Liz, that's very rude. The gag order is still in place.
Yeah.
Trump is now the president. It was certified today, and the gag order is still in place.
What's hilarious is he was on Truth Social going, I can't talk about blah, blah, blah. And he goes ahead and talks about it.
Right.
How can that possibly be right? I mean, really,
Incredible.
it's an outrageous thing. And if you ask 99% of the country, they have no idea what he did wrong. They think what he did wrong was pay off Stormy Daniels. That is not a crime anywhere.
That's
so
correct.
this was an entirely manufactured thing. Like it reminds me of making those sort of millfoy financial instruments during the financial crisis, where they just tumble to their own weight. 39 misdemeanors turned into 39 felonies.
Wow.
It's ridiculous.
It's like magic. Liz,
Yeah.
I know you're very interested in the congestion pricing decision today. So that, let me get this right. So that everybody in New York is going to pay higher prices and more inflation. All the businesses below 60th Street, restaurants, businesses, shows, everything will suffer. And here's Governor Kathy Hochul at it again.
It's pretty staggering, and by the way, connected a little bit to this case, right? They are doing everything possible to make New York City as unattractive as possible to businesses, residents, and commerce in general.
Yeah.
I mean, why, when you have a city that's losing residents and losing businesses, I think we're the #1 state in terms of losing people and losing city. Why would you make it more expensive to be here and harder to be here and riskier, which is what this judge is doing?
Emily, can Trump somehow overturn it? Congestion pricing in New York. It's another tax. It's a payoff to a lot of unions and union bosses in New York. It's not going to do a thing to help the subways or anything like that. Can somehow President Trump stop that?
Well, the federal remedy would be via the court system, and that, of course, can supersede any type of state law that's in effect. But at the end of the day, I think the reality is that, and I don't know why, but the voters here in New York, and myself included in that, have failed to remove these individuals that keep passing these decisions
That's what has to happen.
against the will of all of us.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That pricing, it is impossible to overstate how much that will add. Yes.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
Can we impeach her? Do something? Anyway, Liz Peek, Emily Compagno, thank you very much. You can catch Emily hosting Outnumbered weekdays, 12 p.m. Eastern on Fox News. Fabulous stuff. I'm waiting for your Denny. Here it comes.
Where are you headed?
About that too. Now, just give us a snapshot. Where are we right now on the economy?
Well, since 2019, it dawned on me that the 2020s might have some similarities with the 1920s. A big productivity boom based on technological innovations leading to an increase in the standard of living, low inflation. Productivity is a wonderful variable. It makes everything better. And so we posited that we would start to see a really good rebound in the productivity outlook as technology was used to augment, not replace, but to augment labor, because skilled labor is extremely scarce. And here we are basically, halfway through the roaring 2020s, and it's worked out pretty well. And I think now, especially with some of the policies that the incoming administration is promoting, I think they'd love to see a roaring 2020 scenario.
You know, I was just thinking about that pertaining to what has recently happened out in California. They're saying now over 10,000 structures has been burnt down to the ground. I don't know if that's talking about sheds. I don't know if that's talking about side garages or whatever. I mean, you can tell by looking at it, it's devastating. I mean, absolutely devastating. I know that I think it was Hurricane Hugo, I ain't for sure, that come up through southern Florida that basically wiped Homestead plumb off the map, other than a post office, and all that damage that it done to southern Miami. I know that they lightened their immigration laws to the degree of allowing for more Cubans to come over, more hardcore Cubans pertaining to working labor, building back. And to this day, you can drive through Miami and stop off in just about any business, and the majority of the businesses down there are run by either Cubans or people that speak Spanish. In other words, it's difficult to operate as an American citizen, to just walk into Miami and start dealing with everything, because it's just probably about 90% of the people in there speak Spanish. I even went into a Social Security office and had to wait about an hour and a half for an interpreter to come in, and this was an American Social Security office to take care of some business. The point that I'm making is, since the ordeal has happened out in L.A., them illegals that Donald Trump talks about, which, granted, if they're illegals and they need to be shipped back, get them out of here. But there's a lot of them people that don't mind sweat and tears regarding putting the grind to the whatever, and that may be the only thing that's going to build back L.A. and the parts around L.A. is pertaining to good, sound labors, because by and large, the American institutions have persuaded our American young men and women that the way to go is education. Get a college degree. Get some sort of a degree. That way you can go into a cleaner, more environment, and that way you won't have to get dirt on you, and you won't have to sweat, and you won't have to do this. So the whole imagery about that needs to change. And I'm not saying that education is not good, especially if it's the right education, because it is good. Education is a good thing to know and to have, regardless whether you're breaking down syllables or you're doing equations or whatever. Education is a brilliant thing. But you can educate the wrong group of people for the wrong things that don't wind up having no benefit. I mean, what good did it do for all them people that paid out all that money, and some of them hadn't paid out hardly nothing, because now the government has expunged their debt to the degree that now they don't even have to pay it back. But what good does it do for somebody to spend 2-4 years study, cram, study? They get a degree, and now the next thing you know, they're down here at McDonald's flipping burgers. What good does it do if you have trained the wrong people with the wrong education? It don't do a bit of good. All you're doing is wasting time and energy and effort. So the whole concept of this scenario of get education, somehow or another it needs to be either diminished or it needs to be rethought of towards the imagery that these institutions are putting out there, because by and large, the majority of the Americans, hardcore sovereign citizens of America, are still lazy. They don't have no intentions in getting any type of grease or dirt underneath their fingernails, and they think they're too good to work out in the labor field towards actually digging a hole with a shovel or building a wall or putting up or pouring concrete or being a welder or a plumber or a carpenter or any of the above. By and large, the mass majority of the hardcore sovereign American citizens in America, the young generation growing up, are focused more on cram, study, and as long as I make B's and A's, I'm good to go. And as long as I get a degree hanging on the wall 2 or 3 years later, 4 years later, after my senior, after I graduate, I'll be able to make it in life. Well, we can see now where that's not the case now, is it? That's not the case now, is it, Randy Brundridge, the mayor of Martin? That's not the case with all these other institutions and all these other professors that have crammed, basically crammed college down people's throats like cramming religion. We have seen where you have failed in misleading the general public. So that whole concept is going to have to change if we're truly going to rebuild and become stronger, longer, as Donald Trump talks about. And once more, I'm not knocking education. I think education is a very, very intelligent, brilliant thing. And I regret growing up that I didn't get more of it. Under the circumstances pertaining to what was going on with my father and his abusivenesses pertaining to post-traumatic stress disorder, I was forced to basically go out into the labor field. Of course, I was doing hardcore labor at the age of 10 and 12 years old whenever most kids was sitting in behind a TV screen or playing a game at home. I was mowing yards at the age of 8. I didn't have, per se, a childhood like is a normal childhood. But you know what? In ways, that has actually helped to make me towards who I am, because our father believed in the sink and swim scenario. And he made it rough. Just so happens he made it a little too rough, especially whenever it come to his discipline tactics. But we was always given the sink or swim scenario, which made us tougher. We knew that if we didn't swim, we was going to sink. And odds are, there wasn't going to be nobody to survive us. There wasn't going to be nobody to throw us out a life preserver. I got very, very lucky. It was a blessings of God. Going now on 3 years ago that I was in the Mississippi, in the Tennessee River down by Pickwick. And I had struggled and swam to the point that all my energy had lost. And I guess because the water was so cold, probably something else was setting in pertaining to my body with me being a type 2 diabetic. And I was just at the point of giving in and saying, you know what, this is it. And breathing my last breath. But something within me told me to fight. Fight! Fight for your future. Fight for your grandchildren. Fight for your country. Fight for lower taxes. Fight for equality. Fight for fairness. And I kept fighting and fighting. As a matter of fact, one of the first things I done whenever I finally got back to the bank, I told somebody to call my son and let him know that I was all right. Which I don't know that he appreciated that or not. I mean, that's up to him. But later I talked to my son and I thanked him. He said, "What are you thanking me for, Dad?" I said, "I'm thanking you because you had my granddaughter, which is your daughter. And I was thanking her as I was swimming along with all the other granddaughters, along with all the other little children. I said, you gave me an incentive towards wanting to fight and preserve my life. That way maybe I could help to better humanity rather than hurt humanity." And he said, okay. I don't think he really realized what I was really trying to say. But the fact of the matter is there's a lot of people that if they had a reason of living, it didn't matter if it was because of inheritance, it didn't matter if it's because of grandchildren or great-grandchildren. A lot of times that's the only thing that people can hang on to that will basically give them the power or the incentive towards going the extra mile. And that's the thing that all them people out there in California are going to have to deal with on a psychological level, is that somebody's going to have to convince them that even though you have lost everything, there's still hope. And you have to give them that incentive of that extra mile. The same as I had that incentive while I was drowning in the Tennessee River down by Pickwick, Tennessee, I had that incentive, and I was hanging on to that incentive, and that incentive may have been the only thing that allowed for me to hang on as long as I did before somebody seen what was going on, and they come back and they started saying, we're over here, here, catch the rope. So I did get a lifeline. I did get a life preserver. And I thank God every day that I did. Because if I didn't, I wouldn't be making this video. And that's basically what them people down there in California, that's basically what them people in East Tennessee and North Carolina and all these other episodes that's happening in people's lives, regardless whether it be on a one-to-one basis or a big community basis, that's what they need. They need incentive. Incentive is what gives people momentum. Because if you feel like that you're already defeated before you step out into the battle of life, well, then odds are you probably are defeated. Because that's what you believe. But if you believe that there's hope, and that the people will get turned around, and that they are going to be fighters like you are, well, then continue to fight. And that's the advice that I can give anybody right now, is to fight and to fight and to keep fighting, even until the very last breath. Do not surrender. Do not give in. Fight.
So I think it's going to happen. But I was looking for it no matter who won, because I think sometimes we give too much attention to Washington, with all due respect. I know you spent a lot of time down there. But I think you also have often said that the economy has its own animal spirits.
Yes.
It's got its own dynamics. It's an entrepreneurial, capitalistic economy still, despite the fact that, in some ways, it's also been offset by some crony capitalism. But the venture capital, the technology innovations, they're all there, and they're driving this economy and making the U.S. exceptional.
We've seen, it's interesting, we've seen a tremendous surge in optimism.
Yeah.
But we can also see where there's been attacks, just like 9/11, just like other bad events that's happened to us. COVID, that's another deal. We've been punched at. We've been ravaged again and again and again. And unless we really stand up with a fighting spirit, if you get punched at enough, eventually it's like, wow, is it even worth it anymore? Well, sure it is. Sure it's worth it. It's worth it to ourselves, and it's worth it to the future generations growing up. Sure it's worth it towards a better future for tomorrow. Sure it's worth towards striving towards peace and utopia and love and grace and mercy and divine intervention that the Bible talks about. Sure it's worth fighting towards giving your heart and your life over to Christ and allowing for him to be your northern star in which way that you're to go and how that you're to go. Because by and large, it wouldn't matter if I had 100 grandchildren. It was God that gave me that spirit, that fighting spirit towards hanging on and swimming whenever I was at the point of fixing to give in and drown. It was the Father, the Holy Spirit within me, that gave me that fighting encouragement. And if you don't have that, then you're lacking. And that's the part that we have seen diminish in America. We have seen the lacking of those who are truly born again through the anointing of the power of God, through the teachings of the Lord Jesus Christ. And because of it, it has had a profound effect upon to the American productivities. It has set us back. It hadn't completely whipped us. It hadn't completely defeated us. But man, are we ever taking on a tongue lashing, as my grandmother said. Well, you sure did give me a tongue lashing. Well, maybe I did. Well, maybe it's time for you to get a tongue lashing. Maybe it's time for you to listen, straighten up, cooperate, get in the grassy row, as my grandpa used to say. Son, you need to be in the grassy row. You don't need to be over here in this side over here. This side over here don't need no help. It's this row right here. The row that all these weeds and all this grass is growing up. That's the row you need to be in. Get out of that row and come over here in this row.
Since the election, And I think people are counting on the tax cuts, for example, and the deregulation. And I think you are too.
Yeah.
And let's see, the S&P index is where right now?
Around 6,000
So you're looking for 10,000.
by the 1920.
I truly believe that's one of the reasons why Christ said, and you can take it for what it's worth, Christ said, do not throw your pearls before the swine. In other words, once you identify that a person is using you or taking advantage of you, why are you continually giving to that cause? You know they're not grateful. You know they're in the back in behind your back. They're only laughing and sniggering because they felt like that they got over on you. And Christ said to depart and flee from these people. For it would have been better for Sodom and Gomorrah, for the group of people that wouldn't accept you. That's what's happened to America in the past 30 plus years, that Northwest Tennessee still ain't come in confronts with, that you have rejected a message coming from God through a godly man. I'm not saying that I'm perfect, but it was a divine message that by and large Northwest Tennessee rejected, and because of it, it has caused dilemmas, not just in Northwest Tennessee, but dilemmas all over America, because once it's spread abroad, then it's looked at on a massive scale rather than just an individual scale or an independent scale. And that's where we're at right now. We're at the point that it would have been better if they would have accepted the message than it would have been for them to have rejected the message, because look what it has gotten them by rejecting the message. We got all these factories around here that's empty, that used to have 200 or 300, 400 people. Some of them had a shift or two. I mean, to some degree, yeah, there's been a lot of people that's done really, really good. But right now, people are not doing good. Those younger people that I'm talking about that needs to have some sort of incentive don't have it. Their incentive, their Northern Star, is no longer there. And because of it, it has diminished us.
To help him out, formally or informally, I don't want to see Bidenflation ratcheting back up in Trump's first year. So I'm not sure what anybody can do about it. Maybe spending less.
The reality is economists like you and myself tend to look at inflation as on a year-over-year basis, prices now versus a year ago. Most Americans look at it on a 5-year basis.
That's
and on a
right.
5-year basis, we are seeing prices a lot higher. I mean, you know, I'm shocked by some of the prices that I see out there and what we have to pay. And so I think that what the American public wants to see is prices coming down. And I think the only way that that's going to come without having a recession or a depression, the only reasonable way it's going to come down is if, in fact, we get energy prices down.
Right.
So I really agree with that approach of the administration. Get energy prices down. And that's a very, very important key driving force for the level of prices. And so I think it is possible to bring in the prices down. But I think you have to do that by pumping out more oil, more gas.
Producing more energy.
And producing more energy. And the geopolitical consequences are also very positive.
See, the old school people always go back to the oil and gas pertaining to energy. And the new school people says, you know what? There's other alternatives other than oil and gas pertaining to alternative energy. That's the part that I don't go along with whenever they get to talking about wanting to stimulate the economy. There's all kinds of ways that you can stimulate the economy other than drilling. Drill, baby, drill, baby, drill, drill, drill. For some reason, they're blinded. They have been hoodwinked. They have been deceived. And to them, that's the only way out. That's the only way out. And there's no doubt we are dealing with energy shortages, and energy does dictate around everything else. There's no doubt that's true. But there's other ways other than black oil and gas to generate that. That's the part that I continue to keep harping on again and again and again, that obviously is just going through one ear and out the other.
Good diversified portfolio that'll work in this kind of scenario.
Please stay with us. We're coming right back.
10 days of incredible 20 and 25 breaking into this new year. Incredible.
This program is a paid advertisement from U.S. Money Reserve, a company not affiliated with U.S. government or the U.S. Mint. Philippine deal is...
I don't know what this is. This ain't about... This is not about... No, this is something else. This is something else. Stop it.
No, they're just all...
Back up. Back up. I don't think it'd go back but just so far. Right there. Now let's change channels.
Root through your trash? Robitussin with real honey in it.
Go over here. Let's see what they're talking about.
Too much.
Well, let's see what they're talking about. Well, let's see what they're talking about. That's what channel we was on. Sorry about that. Let's see what they're talking about.
Everywhere, so you never really know what's really going on.
I'm talking about the fire.
Yeah, mixed information. That's what makes it really hard when you're stuck in the middle of all of this. But, the mayor says that she's hoping to get an accounting of everything that has happened up until this point and moving forward. Montez Jacques, thank you so much for your time. We hope the best for you and your family.
Thank you very much for that. And just one more time, my barber did lose his home. He does have 5 kids. He's an absolutely incredible person. Not only did he cut my hair, you can see I need a haircut really badly right now. But his GoFundMe, I posted the link on my Instagram right now. It's at Joe Sweatpants. And any donation, $1, $5, anything helps him.
Every little bit helps. Thank you so much. I hope to get him some help as well. Okay, so thank you. Los Angeles communities impact.
There's no doubt that right there is the safest, most efficient way of knowing that every dollar that you spend or give away is going to be going to a worthy cause. Because I've heard various politicians that's already talk about scam artists that's coming to the area, or people that's wanting to take advantage of their citizens, including insurance companies that ain't willing to fulfill their commitment that they have made with their customers. Matter of fact, some of the insurance companies has actually been abandoning their customers because they felt like that it was a high-risk area, with California being the way California is pertaining to their weather patterns. Well, they've been doing the same thing out in Florida towards evacuating their customers out there and abandoning them. And I think the government needs to step in and say, you know what? You people can't just pick and choose towards getting the cream off the top of the pie. If you're going to be an insurance company, you need to insure the good ones is just like the bad ones, regardless of where they live or who they are or what they do. And, this was one of the things that was talked about, I guess, even in the 70s regarding all this information warfare pertaining to AI and all this other stuff, is that once the dictators, I'm going to call them dictators, or the money people, the 1%ers, once they become so advanced that they can now study who we are, let's say the insurance company says, well, this guy here, he's type 2 diabetic, and this person here is this way and this person here is that way, and because of it, we're gonna charge them twice as much money, or we're just not going to insure them, or they get to studying their bloodline towards what is it possible that they could have inherited through their ancestry, and because of it, well, we're not going to insure that person. Why? Because their father died of a heart attack and their mother had cancer. It's inherited in their genes. So those are things that the government needs to look at pertaining to this insurance fraud. And that's exactly what it is. It's insurance fraud. And it's fraud not towards the public, frauding the insurance companies, but it's the other way around, towards the insurance companies frauding the public. The government needs to look at that and identify these problems in that and say, you know what, even though you're an independent entity pertaining to your business of being either Farm Bureau, State Farm, Geico, Allstate, whoever that you might be, and there's probably thousands of other little mama papa insurance companies out there that just at a whim of a hat There's probably thousands of independent insurance companies out in California that have basically just throw up their hands and file for bankruptcy. That's how they'll abandon their customers. They'll file for bankruptcy, and the next thing you know, well, that company ain't even a company no more. Well, why not? Well, they've gone out of business. But then you find out a year or two later that the very people that was working under this name has now changed their name, and they're still doing the same thing in another entity, in another name. But now they're being more resilient in who they pick and choose towards who they're going to insure, who they're not going to insure. It's a scam. And it's a scam that the government needs to figure out that, no, I don't agree with nobody gunning nobody down pertaining to the insurance man that got gunned down in the streets of New York in broad daylight, or just about daylight. I don't agree with nobody being executed that way, because everybody's got a right to be heard in the court of law. But at the same time, we must recognize that what these insurance companies are doing has provoked some of that in people wanting to go after the CEOs of these insurance companies. That will be a long, brought out deal regarding, what are they saying, 10,000, at least 10,000 structures have been burnt. And you're looking at, now they're saying that $50 billion ain't even close. Now they're saying between $100 billion and $125 billion. I mean, I don't know which is what. I know that was a lot of high dollar real estate out there that got burnt. Restaurants, schools, etc. But there has to be limits in what an insurance company either can or cannot do, because as I was talking to some people yesterday regarding the insurance companies, which is a reflection of scammers, okay, that whenever I started working in collision specialists in about 1995, I think it was either 97, 98, may have been 99, that Florida got hit by several hurricanes back to back. I think it was like 5 hurricanes in total that year. And it was so much damage that the insurances down there was begging for the insurances up here to send down adjusters. Well, because I work so closely with various insurance companies, because today, if you run a body shop, the vast majority of your customers are going to be insured. I was finding out that various insurance companies up here in Tennessee, and I'm pretty sure it was probably that way in Alabama and every other place, was sending estimators down south where all the damage was. And once they got down there, the insurance companies themselves was wanting those adjusters to play by a different set of rules than what is normalized up this way. And you may be asking, well, what kind of rules was they playing by? Well, they was going down to Florida, and the insurance companies was teaching them that even though your house got blown away and a portion of your roof is laying over here, and it may not be but 6 foot by 8 foot, that still got some shingles on it, because it didn't just totally annihilate all the wood in that corner of that house, we can deduct $2 or $3, $4, $5, maybe even $10,000 to prorate stuff. Prorating it kind of like prorating a battery, or prorating other stuff. You know, it's got to the point now that if you got a 2020 vehicle that's already got 60, 70, 80,000 miles on it, and the insurance company requires for the vast majority of the shops, it don't matter if it's dealership shops or independent shops, to first look and see if you can find used parts to repair that vehicle with, because it's not a new vehicle. Okay? Once they have looked for the part and they can't find a part, and that in and of itself is turning into a nightmare towards all these different salvage yards, then they can go to LKQ. They can go to generic parts. If generic parts ain't available, then the next step is, well, let's go back to the original manufacturer, even though it's going to cost about 3 times more than what it would be for a used part or a generic part. We still have to satisfy the customer. So we noticed by these adjusters coming back from Florida of what these insurance companies was doing. Especially, I took notice in what that they was doing whenever Katrina hit, and so many of them that was crawfishing off of their responsibilities. Now, once more, I'm talking in general, pertaining to scam artists. They was not giving their customer base, even though some of them people had long-term relationships with the insurance company. They may have had a policy for 30, 35, 40, 50 years and never missed a payment. And now all of a sudden, you thought that you was insured. Come to find out, they ain't going to pay a dime. Well, why? Well, because you didn't have water insurance. You didn't have flood insurance. Even though it was the 200-mile-an-hour winds, Category 5 hurricane, that picked up that wall of water that turned into an tsunami, a tidal wave, that throwed all that water inland, and some of them people was being receiving water damage 20, 30, 40 miles inland, because a lot of that water was being pushed up them canals and being pushed up them creek beds and being pushed up them river beds to where it caused flooding that ordinarily you never would have seen that type of flooding. So the people bought into that. Oh, wow, I didn't have flood insurance, and because of it, now my $200,000 house, or now my $400,000 house, they're only going to give me $5,000 for a nuisance settlement, or maybe $2,500 for a nuisance settlement, or they're going to give me this for a nuisance settlement. In the meantime, while you have to take this nuisance settlement, you've got land pirates, people that does have money, coming in and offering big bucks for your lot. Oh, I'll give you twice as much money as what you thought that your lot was worth. And basically, the people are feeling like that they're being blackmailed, and they are. I couldn't tell you at the thousands and thousands of people that got blackmailed in Katrina, that basically their lives got ruined because of the scam artist coming from the insurance company regarding insurance fraud. And whenever I'm saying insurance fraud, I'm talking about the insurance frauding the public, not the public frauding the insurance companies. So be careful whenever you start giving money to these different entities pertaining to the damage down in California, or the damage in East Tennessee, or the damage in North Carolina, or the damage in Florida, wherever, that you make sure that you are giving money to an established, recognized, reputable entity, because if you're not, your money could actually be going to some crook, to some scam artist. And there's all kinds of ways that you can scam people out of money. A lot of their problems down in Florida, is what I was told, is that you would have scam artists come in there and give out an estimate on, let's say they're going to repair a housetop, and they gave out an estimate for $20,000. Well, the only way to lock that in, these scam artists would convince the people, the only way to lock that in, that you have to come up with $2,000 or even $5,000 to lock that contract in. That way, whenever we finally got around to it, we would put a new roof on your house. Well, what these people was doing, they was taking people's money and then running. They wasn't coming back and doing none of the work. So now the customer has done been out $2,000 to $5,000 waiting for this contractor to come in there and put a new roof on her house, and now they're gone. Or the customers down in Florida had good insurance, and I've been told, as crazy as this may sound, that there was people in East Tennessee and North Carolina that actually had flood insurance. But because it was considered moving water versus still water, well, we're not going to pay for that damage. No, that was Russian water that come down from the mountainside. We're not gonna pay for that. Any way that they can, they try to crawfish out of their responsibilities that they have made with the public, and that's where the government needs to step in and say enough is enough towards the citizens, the sovereign citizens of this great nation being taken advantage of. And you cannot continue to do this again and again and again and again and think that there ain't going to be repercussions, because there are. You wonder how come that right now the credit card indebtedness, I didn't see the last report towards this last quarter, but before this last quarter come in, it was already 1.3 or 1.2 trillion dollars in credit card indebtedness alone, just in America alone. Probably another $500,000 or whatever dollars, or $500 million to that, or I think I'm talking about billion, 1 point something billion, but I may be mistaken on that. Sometimes I get it confused towards the billion mark and the million mark, because these are things whenever I went to school that we never did think that we was going to have to address, much less the trillion mark. We never did go to the more than the 9 letter capital, because we didn't think that anybody would go beyond the billion. Now they throw trillion around just like they throw billion, and they throw billion around like they do million. So these figures are all unbelievable figures, and sometimes I do get them mixed up. But anyways, getting back to the scam artists, make sure the money that you're giving to whoever that you're giving it to is a reputable, recognized entity that's supposed to be a non-profit entity, that you know that your money is going to the right causes. Because if not, you're liable to be taken through the cleaners. That's the only point that I'm trying to make in response to what you're seeing here and what you've been listening to pertaining to the profits and the gangs and the do's and the don'ts versus the old administration versus the administration coming into power. And really and truly, I think it's negligence upon to the American people's part that they only go back to the previous administration. I think you need to go back to the core of origin, in which whenever all this first began, which would be about 5 or 6 administrations back, all the way back to the Carter and the Reagan and the Bush administrations, that has set a sail towards us being where we are today. Just like the Panama Canal. The Panama Canal should have never been given away for $1. That was the most craziest idea. They can try to imitate that. They can try to duplicate that. They can try to justify what they done and how they done it any way that they want to. But the bottom line is, now we are under their submission versus them being under ours. I ain't never studied the deal with Greenland. I don't know why that's such of a enticing adventure towards Donald Trump. Looking at that, I do know that Donald Trump has made reference to the same thing that I believe, that those oil mines in South America never should have been given over to the people that's now in charge of those oil mines, because now what they do with the profit of those oil refineries is that they finance terrorist groups, and the terrorist groups are the ones that hate Americans and hate the Jews, and the terrorist groups are the ones that want to dominate the world off of their jihad or their Sharia law entity ideal, which is evil. You can try to characterize it, you can make it up, you can camouflage it, you can do whatever you want to do with a lot of those people over there, but the bottom line is this: what they're trying to do is control the world with their idiocy. Same way with Hitler. Hitler wanted to control the world with his idiocy. Evil. Being a dictator. And our American people seen through that and said, you know what, this ain't going to happen. And our American people put an end to it. There's an old saying, sometimes you got to outfox the fox. Once more, going back to the scriptures where Jesus said, do not throw your pearls before the swine. Pearls representing something good, swine representing something bad. All throughout the Bible, hogs and pigs is always looked upon as being bad. Talks about the hoof, the split hoof, and the hoof, and all the above in the Bible. You're not supposed to be taken advantage of, even though you're a Christian. Even though you're a born-again Christian. God did not intend for you to be somebody's whipping post or for you to be taken advantage of. And that's exactly what they wanted to do to myself and my brother and I whenever I first moved back here in 2014. Various people in this community wanted to take advantage of us. We was reaching out and doing the proper right things towards crying out to the law, and the law wouldn't protect us. Because of that, that's dereliction of duty. They can use whatever ideal, they can use whatever kind of excuse that they want to up there in Dresden, up there at the Dresden courthouse, but the bottom line is, we was being hammered on. We was being tormented down here simply because of what? Because of Juby's ideology. Because of the teaching that the Windmill Ministries missions had been teaching these people about for the past 30 plus years, and none of them wanted to accept it because they was more susceptible at looking at the latter part of the verse versus the first part of the verse. They was bamboozled. They was hoodwinked. And now look what it's gotten them. It's all backfired in their faces. Now you have all these factories that's empty. Now you have all these problems with all these drugs and all these people that can't even hardly walk right or talk right or think right. So the professional industry has brought this upon to who? The general public.
Communities impacted by the wildfires need support. Help the American Red Cross provide meals and shelter to these families. Donate today by visiting go.fox/Red Cross or by scanning the QR code on your screen. Coming up, we'll take you back live to Los Angeles for the latest on evacuations. That's next.
A free tiny library donated by a Girl Scout troop. Books still there. It's still intact. It just makes no sense in figuring out what survived and the bulk of what did not. Alicia?
Great, thank you.
Let's back up. Let's get all that. Right here, stop.
Having to deal with situations like this. A battalion chief driving around a little earlier told me what they're looking for right now are very potential pop-up little spots that they have to make sure don't turn into something else for the few remaining structures and buildings that remain, lest they should catch back on fire. All of this happening is they're worried about the impending winds picking up here a little bit later. So we're going to continue to monitor this shot right there. But I do want to show you one last thing, and that is, of the few things still standing in this area where we are, a free tiny library donated by a Girl Scout troop. Books still there. It's still intact. It just makes no sense in figuring out what survived and the bulk of what did not.
See, in the eyes of the blinded and in the eyes of the non-believers, they're not going to be able to make sense out of this stuff that to them, they just can't figure it out. It makes no sense. But the people like us, the Christians, we can look and see where, you know what, that right there was organized by some young girls that was very, very sincere, and God blessed their endeavors. And because God blessed their endeavors, God protected their endeavors. And it's little things like that that they're going to be able to detect in seeing where this survived and this did not. Where this got torn up and this did not. I'll just use an example real quick as I'm fixing to close. There was a major tornado a few years ago that come up through Reelfoot Lake and wound up hitting a little town called Casey, Kentucky, which was just north of Union City, just north of the Tennessee-Kentucky state line. Everything in that little community basically got destroyed. I mean, everything. Tornado was just whipping and tearing and ripping stuff apart and just it was the same tornado that left Casey and went up to Mayfield, Kentucky, and out of that whole thing of tornadoes, I think it killed over 100 people, tore Mayfield, Kentucky all to pieces, and went all the way up through, I think it went all the way over the Kentucky state line into Indiana, if I'm not mistaken. It was like a tornado that stayed on the ground for like 140 miles, which was unusual for a tornado to get on the ground and stay on the ground for that length of time. But the point that I'm making about Casey is that there was one church in the center of Casey that did not even so much as hardly get any damage at all. I think they got just a little bit of wind damage off of one or two of their shingles being blown around. But the building was just as solid after it was over with, after that tornado outbreak happened. It was just as solid afterwards as it was before. So how can you not explain the unexplainable that way in the eyes of the believers? Because we know what was protecting that church in Casey. We know what was protecting that Girl Scout bookshelf right there that some very, very sincere girls put out for the benefit of the people, for the glory of God. We know why miracles happen and why stuff takes place. And just like the tornado that hit in Weakley County that basically blowed half of Dresden, Tennessee away, other than the courthouse, out of all the damage, there should have been several fatalities. Wasn't a one. Was not a one fatality. Even though stuff got torn apart and got destroyed. And I'm not saying that some people didn't get injured, because I know that they did. But you know what the biggest fatality out of the storm that hit up here in Dresden, Tennessee was? I don't know what insurance company said it was, but I'm hearing, even to this day, there's still people that's fighting the insurance company through the courts. Because the insurance companies are still wanting to rake the people over the coals. Still wanting to take advantage of the people that had good, sound insurance. The devil and the devil's people is out to kill, steal, and destroy. God and God's true people are doing just the opposite. We are builders, not tear-downers. People in this area wanted to put me in the category of being a tear-downer. People in this area wanted to put me in the category of being a homegrown terrorist. People in this area wanted to put me in the category of being a monster. And the people that was being the monster was the people that was falsely accusing God's children of being the monsters. We know who the monsters are. We know who the fake politicians are that say that they care about their citizens, but in reality have only cared about themselves. The American people are tired of this. God's chosen people, the elect, are tired of this, and it's time for them to speak out. And that's the reason why I've been making video after video, link after link, recording after recording, trying to express and explain my story in little bits and pieces. That way people can relate and understand what has went on with the lifespan of the Windmill Ministries missions that come back to 291 Thompson Road, Sheridan, Tennessee, zip code 38255, and built, or was in the process of building, a recovery shelter. And because of circumstances that went plumb haywire pertaining to the law no longer protecting us down here, our work got diverted. But it didn't stop me from still doing what I wanted to do all along by putting up a Purple Heart Dragon memorial. So even though my work has been delayed, even though my work has stopped at times because of the devil and the devil's people, they haven't finished us off. As the old saying goes, it's not over till the fat lady sings. And the fat lady hadn't sang yet pertaining to the lifespan of the Windmill Ministries missions. I'm still living. The ministry is still living. God's chosen people are still living. And the meek will inherit the earth, regardless whether the devil and the devil's people desires or likes it or not. God's chosen people will stand through the thick and the thin, and they will be the ones that will come out on top. And you can mark that down on the wall somewhere or chisel it in stone. These are the things that will occur, and the reason for it occurring is because the Father, God the Creator, the Maker of all, is the one that has already predicted for this to occur. All we got to do is declare it, accept it, and then move on. Hallelujah. God bless America. God bless our troops. God bless our endeavors towards which way that America and the rest of the world goes from this moment on, because there's no doubt, because it has been delayed in the past 30 plus years, we're going to be seeing and going through things today that we ordinarily wouldn't have seen, and going through things 25, 30 plus years ago that we wouldn't have been dealing with then that we're dealing with today. But I think that God and the Holy Spirit, no, I don't think, I know that God and the Holy Spirit working through God's people will prevail. In other words, these people will come back. I don't know how, I don't know when, I don't know where, but they will come back. They will. Shalom.